Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han-dan in Seoul. Tensions are mounting on the Korean peninsula amid North Korea's recent display of heightened hostility towards the south, coupled with its latest announcement of a successful test launch of a solid-fuel hypersonic missile. Further fueling North Korea's bold moves was Russia's decision to terminate UN monitoring of North Korea's sanctions, which had been in place for the past 15 years. Against this backdrop, South Korea is bracing for further provocations from the north in the lead up to next week's general elections, as well as significant political events scheduled in Pyongyang this month. For an in-depth discussion on the latest stories surrounding the two Koreas, we're joined in the studio by Go Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Evans Revere, former U.S. Acting Assistant Secretary of State and non-resident senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. It's great to have you back.
Great to be with you.
All right, Dr. Go, I want to start with you. And where else can we begin tonight but North Korea's hypersonic missile? It has claimed a successful test launch of a new type mid to long-range hypersonic missile. It also said that it has achieved its 10-year goal of making all missiles solid fuel and nuclear capable. How threatening is this new development to South Korea and the world?
Well, it represents an overall upgrade of North Korea's missile arsenal. And I think the moniker hypersonic is very sexy and it attracts a lot of attention. But in truth, what really matters in this case is the replacement or actually deployment of an entirely 100% solid fuel rocket engine missile fleet in the North Korea's missile arsenal. It means that the North Korea can mount surprise attacks against South Korea, Japan, or even the United States, because the solid fuel rocket engines tend to shorten the preparation time for launch. So, what the reason why this matters is because the assumption, the underlining the missile defense that's being built up by South Korea and the United States is based on the fact that it needs to detect preparatory steps for launch. So the more time the alliance has at its disposal to detect and track these kind of developments in North Korea, more accurate the response will be and faster, obviously, the response. So North Korea is essentially trying to undermine this step or this attack preparation on the part of the alliance. So yeah, I think this is a reason why this is an important development. But at the same time, it's not surprising. I mean, North Korea tends to brag about these kind of developments because it's a part of their political messaging to Seoul, Washington, and elsewhere that it has become a very threatening nuclear and missile power. So I think they're going to keep repeating this kind of message over and over. But when it comes to actuality of this development, we need more further evidence for sure.
And on that note, the South Korean military has said that North Korea's claims on the missile's range, speed, as well as its gliding capability is exaggerated. So,
yeah, for instance,
right.
North Korea, they claim that the range of this test has been around 1,000 kilometers, but then the South Korea and the United States military found that in fact the range is much shorter, 600 kilometers. So this is a pattern of North Korea exaggerating their test specification as well as the achievements.
And just a few days ago, North Korea's National Space Agency reaffirmed that it will launch multiple reconnaissance satellites this year. Do you expect another satellite launch within this month? And also, do you expect other types of provocations in the lead up to next week's general elections?
When it comes to the first part about the expectation of further satellite launch by North Korea, no doubt about it. So the North Korea Space Agency or National Aerospace and Technology Agency, or NADA, has reached an inflection point in their development roadmap. It's very similar to what North Korea achieved back in 2015. What happened back then was that just like with their satellite launches, remember, like last year, it took 3 times for North Korea to achieve a successful satellite launch, and it was with probably with the help of Russian technicians on the ground in North Korea. So similarly, back in 2015, North Korea had a string of failures with their ballistic missile development. But then for magical reason. After 2015, North Korea was achieved not just a much higher success rate with their test, but also in terms of variety of the missile systems they were developing. So it could be possible that North Korea has achieved again a major milestone last year, successful space vehicle launch and then putting a satellite into the orbit. So it's also probable that they are assisted with this by Russia. So it means that Russia's technical assistance didn't stop just with a single launch. Chances that Russia provided an entire package of technological assistance. That means that North Korea will be able to demonstrate not just in terms of numbers of launches, but also sophistication of their satellite systems. And I think that this is the reason why the North Koreans have promised to launch not just a spy satellite, but weather satellites and other types of satellites into the orbit. So I think it's going to happen in a very short period. Again, we should be prepared for that because it's in the contravention of the UN sanctions resolution.
Meanwhile, Dr. Revere, the surge of activity between North Korea and Russia continues, with the Pentagon describing it as a flourishing relationship. Russia's intelligence chief reportedly paid a visit to North Korea last week, and we're also hearing reports that Russia is providing oil in exchange for weapons. How do you perceive these latest series of activities between the two countries?
Well, what we're seeing here is just the latest example of the rapidly growing tactical and strategic cooperation and mutual support between Moscow and Pyongyang. I think it also is a very important step as the Russians and the North Koreans work to try to further expand and enhance their relationship. This is an ongoing process, but it's moving very, very quickly, and these are the latest two examples of that. Reading between the lines of the reports about the Russian intelligence chief's visit to Pyongyang, my sense is that Pyongyang and Moscow are working to coordinate their respective responses to the threats that they perceive from the United States, the ROK, Japan, among others. This is going to bear careful watching, I think, in Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo, because expanded Russian-North Korean intelligence cooperation has the potential to pose a serious threat to the unfolding trilateral security partnership that we're seeing among the ROK, the United States, and Japan. Meanwhile, you mentioned the oil shipments. Russia's provision of fuel to North Korea is a very serious development. If these deliveries continue, they will at some point violate the existing UN Security Council sanctions, the limitations that have been placed on the amount of fuel that North Korea is allowed to import. At a minimum, the deliveries that are going on now threaten the integrity and the viability of the international sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea. But together with Russia's recent veto in the United Nations Security Council that basically has ended the mandate of the UN panel of experts that monitor the efficacy of the sanctions regime on the DPRK, this is a very ominous sign. And the United States and its partners, especially the ROK, are going to have to look long and hard at alternative mechanisms that they can put in place collectively, individually and collectively, to ensure that some mechanism can be used to monitor all of these sanctions going forward.
And in related question, I mentioned at the top that the UN's monitoring of North Korea sanctions will end this month. Tell us about the roles. Tell us more about the roles of the UN monitoring panel. And in your view, has it been effective in watching North Korean activities?
The work of the panel of experts has long been a central component of the Security Council's and the international community's efforts to monitor the implementation of international sanctions. And I think the POE, as it's called, has been extremely effective in this regard. If you read any of the POE's reports, it's remarkable how much great work has gone into their efforts to monitor the implementation of those sanctions. The panel of experts has helped us understand better how North Korea violates and avoids these sanctions. And therefore, the panel has helped the international community to improve the efficacy of those international sanctions. So that is an extremely important function, and unfortunately it's coming to an end. As a result of Russia's veto, it's going to be a lot more difficult for the UN Security Council and member states to effectively implement existing sanctions. And in my view, that's precisely why Russia made that move, since it will now make it much easier for Moscow to, and Pyongyang for that matter, to mask Russia-North Korea arms trade, Russian oil shipments to North Korea, and other violations of existing UN Security Council resolutions, because this important monitoring mechanism is about to go out of business. I should also add that Russian veto in the UN Security Council, in my view, it marks the de facto end of any cooperation between and among the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council on North Korea. That cooperation has been declining rapidly. Well, we're watching the funeral of that cooperation take place right now as we watch the end of the panel of experts. That cooperation had indeed evaporated because of the deteriorating relations between Russia and China on the one hand and the United States on the other. And now Russia's veto has now effectively slammed the door on such cooperation. That does not bode well for the future.
Dr. Go, Dr. Revere has just highlighted that the UN was remarkable. The UN experts panel, monitoring panel, has been remarkable in keeping North Korea under the radar, which makes the current situation all the more concerning. What are some possible ramifications of the UN monitoring termination, and how can we ensure that North Korean sanctions are implemented even in the absence of the global monitoring?
Well, that's a great question, and in fact, I couldn't agree more with what Mr. Revere said about the function and importance of the panel of experts, and in making sure that the international community watches and then implements the sanctions that the North Korea faces today. But having said that, I think the golden year of the UN sanctions regime probably ended in 2019 with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to North Korea's self-isolation from the world, essentially, making the sanctions regime less effective. And since then, we know China and Russia are not contributing much to the sanctions implementation. But then again, we know that this state of affairs, where we are no longer relying on cooperation from China and Russia, has been going on for a while. And the international community, other than China and Russia, have developed its own responses to this issue. And we're talking about more in terms of like-minded states getting together and implement sanctions. And so case in point will be the sanctions enforcement cell. This is a cooperative framework between the mainly United States and its allies based in Yokohama, Japan, a naval base. And what it does is it watches the sanctions violation activities by North Korea and other countries that are abetting this kind of activities by North Korea. So I think we're going to see an expansion of these kind of examples. So essentially, like-minded states coming together and trying to mount its own sanctions enforcement operations. We have seen such example that already this morning. South Korea, it was reported that the South Korean government essentially detained a non-flag, actually Togo flag vessel called the We, which was engaged in the sanctions violation activities at the request of the United States government. So in fact, the panel of experts for a long time has been acting on the information provided by the member states. So in that sense, I think the removal of the panel of experts, if really indeed happens, it's not going to completely undermine the sanctions enforcement activities. So in that sense, I'm less concerned about our ability to track and also enforce sanctions against the parties that violate these measures. But what I'm concerned about is that this is exactly what the Russians probably intended with their move to terminate the mandate of the panel of experts, is to take away the legitimacy from the United Nations sanctions regime against North Korea. So unilaterally, we can still enforce sanctions against North Korea and other parties that abet these kind of activities, but then it's no longer be legitimized by the United Nations. So then the Russian and probably the Chinese can now claim that the sanctions in place against North Korea are no longer legitimate. These are unilateral actions by countries that are against China and Russia and North Korea, or against even like the stability in the region. So in that sense, what this marks, what Russia's move has marked, is the beginning of the politicization of the international sanctions regime. So this is going to be a political challenge for all of us from now on.
So you don't think the termination will undermine the sanctions monitoring as much because it has been closely watched by UN member states, including the U.S. and its allies anyway. But what's even more concerning is Russia taking the legitimacy away from the United Nations. Now, staying with you, Dr. Go, North Korea will mark important political events this month. April 15th is Kim Il-sung's birthday, and 25th is the founding anniversary of People's Army. Now, while some reports indicate that Pyongyang is preparing for military parade, the South Korean government says it hasn't detected any such signs yet. Are you anticipating a military parade? And if held, what significance would it hold?
So it could be, I think there's evidence for pointing towards whether the parade will be actually held or not. It's kind of a mixed bag. And the reason is because this year is not an important, it's still an important anniversary for them. Kim Il-sung's birthday is called the Day of the Sun, after which the birth date of the year of birth date of the founder of North Korea. But having said that, it's not an important year for them because for North Korea, it attaches a special meaning to certain number of years. Essentially, the number of years that represents the multiple of fives. So or the decade of celebration is very important for them. For instance, 2 years ago, that marked the 110th year of the Kim Il-sung's birth. So that was marked an important parade and all that. But this year is not so important for them anymore. So, and at the same time, the North Koreans themselves are, I think, have achieved certain strategic objectives through other means. What I mean by this is that North Korea would mount the parades because for instance, they wanted to launch an ICBM, but North Korea was under pressure by the United States and the international community, so they couldn't really carry out such a provocation. So what they did instead was to mount a show of force by showcasing their new weapon systems. And the best way to do so was by staging a parade. This year, I think North Korea, since last year, North Korea has achieved such goals, demonstrating their presence and raising their prestige in the international arena, for instance, by meeting with Vladimir Putin of Russia. So there's a more satiation of that need. So I think there's a less need for them to mount the parade this time.
And going back to you, Dr. Revere, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will visit Washington next week to hold talks with President Biden. What's expected from the talks?
Well, U.S.-Japan relations, the U.S.-Japan alliance, like the U.S.-ROK alliance, has greatly strengthened over the last 3 or 4 years. I think it's very accurate to say that these two important alliances are stronger and more capable than they've ever been. But the threats and the challenges these alliances are facing are evolving very, very rapidly. We have Russia's war against Ukraine, which has given us a blunt reminder of the dangers to the current international order. We have China's military buildup in the region and its aggressive posture towards its neighbors. That's troubling. North Korea has become a de facto nuclear power. And the cooperation between and among these countries is a growing matter of concern for America and its allies. And I expect the summit between President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida to address all of these challenges and more, including by putting in place perhaps some new mechanisms for defense and security planning and cooperation, and perhaps some new military command relationships aimed at enhancing coordination. There's also going to be a trilateral summit in Washington while the two leaders are there. They're going to meet together with Philippine President Marcos. That event, I think, is going to send an important message about regional solidarity to Beijing. With the challenges and concerns growing in both Europe and in Asia, it's very evident that these two regions are each organizing themselves for some difficult and complicated years ahead. The Biden-Kishida summit is going to tell us a lot about what Washington and Tokyo think needs to be done to meet these emerging challenges. So I think this is a very, very significant meeting, and we ought to be watching the outcomes of it very carefully.
Now, taking a closer look at the summit, Dr. Go, what are the key points of the summit that South Korea should keep a close eye on?
Well, we have to bring the focus back to the Korean peninsula, and then we know there's some important developments taking place between Japan and North Korea regarding surrounding the talks, possible even a summit between Kishida and Kim Jong-un. And then the South Koreans obviously trust the Japanese government to do the right thing, and then limit the agenda to the issue of abductees, and essentially avoid giving the perception that Japan is undermining the common front that the three countries have mounted against North Korea's nuclear program. So I think this is a point that South Korea would like the United States to relay to Japan, and show that the South Korea and the United States are on the same page when it comes to avoiding giving up the perception that Japan and North Korea is essentially engaged in a bilateral track, which could undermine this common front to mount pressure against North Korea. So I think this is probably going to be the most important point that the South Korea will be watching out for. The rest is something that the South Korean government fully supports. We definitely need more active presence and then cooperation between Japan and South Korea and the United States in a trilateral sense, because there are many, many regional challenges that the three countries face together.
And just very quickly before we let you go, Dr. Revere, a North Korean delegation led by the director of the International Department at the Workers' Party, Kim Sung-nam, wrapped up their trip to China, Vietnam, and Laos. What did North Korea gain from the overseas trip?
Well, I think the North Koreans are trying to renormalize their political and diplomatic and party-to-party ties as they continue to emerge from the pandemic-related isolation. And having shut down so many embassies around the world, the North Koreans, I think, are trying to emphasize relations with those countries with which they have traditionally enjoyed good party-to-party ties. So this is trying to firm up what's left of their international diplomatic posture, and particularly firm up their relations with countries they regard as friendly and supportive.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Revere and Dr. Go, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.